Hi, my name is Rick Adams from practicalcsm.com, and welcome to part one of a three-part podcast discussion series with my friend Remco de Vries, Head of Marketing at Insided. Our conversation is titled The Customer Success Profession in 2021, Remco's Predictions. And Remco makes what are, to my mind, some very interesting and valuable observations about some of the key trends we're likely to see in our profession this year. So, without further ado, here is part one for you to enjoy. Hi, my name is Rick Adams from practicalcsm.com, and today's guest is my friend and fellow webinar host back in, was it May or June of this year, when Philip Wolf from Custify, myself, and he ran a very interesting and successful panel-based workshop on the impact of COVID-19 on the customer success profession and the possibilities of a new normal emerging from all of the disruptions that may have both positive and negative implications for the customer success profession as a whole. His name is Remco de Vries, and he is the head of marketing at Insided. Insided is a customer success related software company with a very big difference. It's not a competitor to Gainsight, Custify, Tango, Client Success, or any of the other customer success software companies that you might think of, because Insided is a customer success community platform aimed at customer success teams and community professionals, and who are looking to increase engagement and advocacy and to effectively gather product feedback. Remco himself describes it as a killer combination of a community platform, knowledge-based features, and in-app support with integrations with software like Gainsight, Mixpanel, Salesforce, and Zendesk to get your CSMs an actionable 360-degree view of your customer or user. Remco, as well as hosting our new normal debate last year, you are also a previous podcast guest on this show, if I recall correctly. And that was back in January of this year, just before the whole CV-19 crisis hit. And the topic of that conversation was the customer success maturity model. And it was a very interesting discussion, as I'm sure this conversation will also be. So, Remco de Vries, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Super
Thank
happy
you.
to be back.
Yeah, great. And yeah, good to have you. And perhaps before we jump into the topic for today's podcast conversation, in case not everybody does know you, would you mind spending just a minute or two providing viewers with a brief overview of who you are and what you do for those who have not yet come across you?
Sure. So my name is Remco. I'll skip the last name. I think you did a great job at that. So we'll keep that in. And I'm the head of marketing at Insided. We do all of the aforementioned things. So we're a community platform specifically aimed at customer success teams and B2B SaaS orgs, which I think is an amazing niche it's not even a niche, it's big, right? To work in. And I run the marketing team. So I'm responsible for trying to get as many of the awesome customers in as we can.
Great. Thank you, Remco. Now, today's topic for discussion is perhaps not surprisingly, given the time of year, a forward-looking discussion about what might be in store for us in the customer success profession within 2021, and perhaps even beyond. And you very kindly come up with a whole bunch of very interesting predictions. So I've decided to call this podcast episode The Customer Success Profession in 2021, Remco's Predictions. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, Remco, because at the time of recording, they've not yet been released. But in fact, I have already recorded a three-part Christmas and New Year special podcast conversation with none other than the CEO of Tango, co-author of Farm Don't Hunt, and all-round great customer success expert, visionary, and leader, Guy Napaz, entitled 4 Challenges for the Customer Success Profession in 2021. And part one of that podcast will be released on Christmas Eve, with the final part being released on New Year's Day. So that podcast will, in its entirety, have gone out already by the time people are viewing or listening to this podcast. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but viewers and listeners will, of course, be interested to compare your own views, Remco, with those already expressed by Guy, which you will not have had access to at the time of our recording. So, Remco, are you up to the challenge?
Yeah, well, I'm having a little bit of a what have I gotten myself into moment here. But
it goes deep.
They match somewhere. I mean, I've given you so many because then the chance of one actually sticking is a lot higher, right?
Well, that's actually a really good point, and I think they asked, obviously, A, it's not a competition, and B also then it's not exactly the same because Guy's talking about 4 challenges, you're talking about 7 predictions. So I think it's all good, and there's definitely overlap between the two. So I think it's great to have both perspectives actually. So I think this will be really good. So okay, so now that I've made you thoroughly uncomfortable and increased the pressure by a whole bunch, let's begin. You've provided me with no less, as I said, than 7 predictions for 2021, and I love them. I think they're great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read them out in full first, and then we'll go back and discuss them one by one. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's do it. So here are Remco's 7 predictions for the customer success profession for 2021. They are: number 1, further centralization of customer data to make better customer-driven decisions. Number 2, the breakthrough of the customer education function and the one-to-many CSM. Number 3, customer success goes and stays remote with a knock-on impact on talent and productivity. Number 4, while balancing digital and human touchpoints, personalization will remain the key to success. Number 5, CS tooling will move beyond the traditional CS CRM like Gainsight and will be purpose-built for customer success teams. Number 6, CS confidently takes the seat at the exec table with proper business acumen. And finally, number 7, customer metrics will be company owned, no longer just owned by customer success. Okay, so let's now go ahead.
What's there to discuss? They all make sense.
Well, exactly. So then we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Remco.
You're welcome.
Great speaking to you. Okay, let's take these one by one and let's discuss them. And with your permission, Remco, what I'd like to suggest is that we break each one down into the following parts. Firstly, I'm going to get you to describe or explain exactly what you mean by the prediction, so we're clear what you're talking about, what your prediction is. And then I'd like to discuss what the implications of that prediction might be for the average customer success team, and indeed for individual CSMs as well, of course. And then finally, I'd be very interested if you have any recommendations for actions to be taken regarding this prediction that you'd like to share with the viewers. So does that sound okay?
Sure.
All right, cool. Well, let's begin at the beginning. Your first prediction is further centralization of customer data to make better customer-driven decisions. So as we said, we'll start just with the meaning, and we'll come on to implications and then recommendations in a moment. So Remco, please describe what you mean by further centralization of customer data to make better customer-driven decisions.
Sure, no problem. So as a start, this is the one I was most doubtful about of including, because using data to make better decisions is not really a new narrative, right? Because we've done that this year as well, and probably in previous years as well. It's always been a thing in business to drive overall decisions. But I think in 2021 there will be a sort of deepened layer to actually using data to make better decisions. Our thinking there is as follows. So, as you know, at most companies, and also most companies we talk to, data is still very much spread out across the organization. So different departments will own different subsets of data, or will own their own technology that also has some perhaps customer or product data or anything else in there. And trying to sort of summarize all of that and make sense of that all as a whole is super difficult because it's so spread out. So we feel, as data will take a front row seat in 2021, that CS teams will start to also have a proactive role in trying to centralize all of this data to then, with the proper summary of it all, be able to make truly customer-driven decisions. Okay. Our CEO actually calls this true engagement, which sounds a bit of a marketing thing, like a marketing thing. So I love it personally. But yeah, what that means is that you basically will take all of customer data sources into account, and when you sort of judge your customer relationship or health score, or try to make a decision on an account. So that could be anything from engagement data with your CSM, or engagement data with digital touchpoint, or anything else, or product feedback that they've given, or new product ideas that they send your way, anything basically. Okay. In one pile, in one sort of 360-degree customer overview.
All right. And okay, so yes, I definitely have seen companies who are still very siloed in the way they approach data storage and management, and limited in the way they then collaborate between teams. And it's almost like a protectionist thing, where this is our data and we're not giving it to you, even though you're meant to be on the same side as us because we work for the same company. And but we seem to be, worried about some kind of loss of power or control or something. So I think that's really interesting. And I think that what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that not for all companies by a long chalk, but certainly for some companies, I think that this centralization of data to make customer driven rather than vertical silo driven decision making makes total sense to me. And alongside the technology, it requires a culture change.
Yeah, I agree. We've actually talked to CS teams that, for example, have to actually go to other departments and ask them for an export of something, and then have to wait until the other team has time to actually give them the data they require.
Yeah, it's out of the goodness of their hearts, but they don't have to do it. Yeah, absolutely amazing. So, and the other thing that I was thinking of is that I've had a number of discussions recently around artificial intelligence, and I'm wondering if that's part of your thinking here as well.
Eventually, yeah, but I think, AI can also only be successful if you basically let it loose on everything that you have, right? And AI actually, in the world of customer success, but also community, for example, is now still constrained by having too small of a data set to actually work with. So it will have some benefits in some areas, but I feel like AI will actually truly come to fruition when there's this sort of centralized data sets that you can just let it loose on.
Okay, so what we're talking about is the foundation for AI rather than AI itself at this point. You can't do one without the other. You need this first. So any thoughts? I mean, we've already discussed some of the implications, I think, but any thoughts about implication? I guess to some extent there may be some simplification around process. I'm wondering also, though, whether some things may be currently in the CS team's hands that move out of the CS team's hands because the decision is corporate rather than CS team now.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. There could definitely be some switching of data around teams, and maybe some, let's call it like a structuring of how you actually handle that type data. I think one interesting implication is also that we sort of take the discussion away from just discussing metrics like retention and adoption and all those kind of things, which is very high level, sort of at the end of the spectrum kind of KPIs that are super important. But we also take the discussion a bit more back towards data that we can actually influence every day.
Right.
Which is what I mean with the engagement data and all of those kinds of things. You can actually use that to fuel decisions that you make every day versus only trying to report on something that will maybe only show itself after a month.
I so agree. So what we're talking about here is the difference between leading indicators and lagging indicators, and stuff like retention, stuff like NPS scores. These are lagging indicators. These tell you what the customer has already done based upon what you did before that, and you can't change what you've already done and what they've already done. Whereas leading indicators, you can they help you to predict the future and to change that future, and to me they're the more interesting ones. Now, that's not to say those others aren't important, because you've got to report back to the powers that be on the ROI of customer success, but that's not actually helping you in customer success to do a better job. It's just reporting on what you have already done.
Exactly. And train of thought as you were talking, one more interesting implication for custom success teams on a daily basis could then be, for example, that you can use some of those leading indicators to sort of build predictive analytics on an account. You can actually start learning, start seeing trends, all those kind of things, and you could use them to maybe even give your accounts real-time feedback as you're speaking to them based on certain leading indicators that you already see, and steer the discussion or the result or the account into some direction that you think that should be heading.
So for more information on leading and lagging indicators, on reactive and predictive analytics, on these sorts of things, come on a training course with us at practicalcsm.com and you will learn all about those. But for now, for your first prediction, if this does come true, we do see further centralization of customer success data. Do you have any advice for the CSM or for the CSM team around how to think about or deal with this change as it occurs?
Yeah, I'm sort of hoping that they will spearhead it a little. I think that, and obviously there are always outliers, but I think in general that CS teams can also be a bit more proactive when it comes to actually trying to make this happen and a bit less dependent on other departments.
It's just a really good point, because if you're at the forefront of making it happen, then you're more likely to be given more ownership around it, and therefore have more control over, how it ends up in your organization. Yeah. All right, we better move on. Let's now look at prediction number 2. Your second prediction is the breakthrough of the customer education function and the one-to-many CSM. So as before, let's start with the meaning, and then we'll come on to implications and then recommendations in a moment. So Remco, please describe what you mean by the breakthrough of the customer education function and the one-to-many CSM.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and explain this by having 2 views on this. So an internal sort of employee customer success team driven view and an external more customer driven view. So internally, why we think this is important is much like we started the maturity podcast last year. So you have a customer success team, you have a business, maybe in SaaS, and your numbers of customers are increasing exponentially. Probably also this year already, but especially also next year, the expectations will be that you manage it all and you do it with a certain budget. You can't go over that. You can't keep hiring to support that growth. You need to make smarter decisions. And we feel in 2021, CS leaders will more increasingly turn to technology rather than headcount to actually scale those efforts. So with technology leading the way there a little, we can also expect CS teams to develop more sophisticated customer education programs and tech touch, although I can't call it that, but like one-to-many digital-led strategies to support customer growth. So that's the internal view and why I think these 2 roles, especially in 2021, will be super, super important, and we'll see them more often, especially on customer success teams. And then the external view, so the whole entire world moved to remote in 2020, and your customers also started to rely more and more on information that they can find quickly online in the digital space. So going forward, this also means that CS teams have to increasingly and more proactively support that sort of behavior in their customer engagement strategy. And a strictly sort of more, and this is going to offend some people, but a more passive approach, like just talking to people on MBRs and QBRs and all those kind of things, will no longer do. You need a customer sort of self-service approach that will allow for longer-term customer engagement and advocacy and ultimately probably also even retention. And to tie these activities a bit more to any KPI and influencing those KPIs on a bigger scale, we feel like this will need to become a skill in any customer success team. And education is not super new, already exists, but I feel we'll move towards customer success a little bit more as we see this going on. But definitely the one-to-many CSM, I think, is a new role that we'll see more often.
I think so too. In fact, I'm absolutely certain of it. I'm absolutely certain of it. And we're not necessarily here. It could be the case that we're talking about customer segmentation, right? And we're dealing with a number of different touches of the high touch, medium touch, low touch, tech touch variety. But it's not necessarily always that way. And I would also say, from my own perspective, and see if you agree, that actually tech touch is not like the low cost, worst quality option, which it can sometimes be seen as. It's like, well, high touch, that's high value because it costs us a lot. So the customer wants that. Actually, you know what? I'm not so sure that's always the case. And I would suggest that for many customers, myself included, I don't want to wait for somebody to be available in order for me to move forwards. If at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I want to get on and do it, I want to get online and use a self-service tool. So I think actually we need to turn our thinking around, and it's not just about cost. Now, there are cost implications, and we do need to sort of think about segmentation and what we can afford to deliver as a service, of course, and that's perfectly valid. But I think that what we really need to do is start from the customer journey with this stuff and think about, well, what's a really true benefit to our customers, rather than thinking, outside in rather than inside out.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, the need to have and the need for self-service at customers, I think, has been researched by Gartner and Forrester for, I don't know, a decade, 2 decades now. I think that's
sure.
super clear, and should be clear to any company. And definitely agree on the whole tech touch thing. I mean, this is my personal pet peeve right now in customer success. I feel the word tech touch is wrongly being abused as a way of segmenting your customer base into higher value and more important, and lower value and less important.
Right.
While tech touch has nothing to do with any of that, to be honest. That's just segmentation. Tech touch is a digital-led strategy, or a digital strategy that any self-serving B2B
it could be woven into all levels of a service. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so look, I think we've talked about meaning and implications here. So let's move to advice. If you have any, if you haven't already covered it, anything around advice for the CSMs and for CS leaders around this sort of breakthrough in customer education and the rise of one-to-many.
Yeah, advice. I don't know. It's similar to my previous advice, I guess. I think there is a clear sort of role for CSMs here to sort of deepen their expertise and do a little bit more with more tooling, different channels than they have been doing so far. But yeah, also driving this change requires a proactive willingness of CSMs to actually look further than just what we've been doing for the past couple of years. I think through channels like even hooking up with your marketing team on the website and figuring out how things are structured there.
Okay, that's it for part 1. Please subscribe at practicalcsm.com/member to be updated when part 2 gets released, or alternatively, subscribe on the YouTube channel and then hit the bell icon to be notified whenever a new video is published. See you soon for part 2.